So Patrick, I guess I'd just jump in and maybe as a way of introducing yourself. I mean, you are, I think without a doubt, one of the coolest guys I know. And the question would be, of all the things you could have done with your life, why did you pick AI as the place to make your stand and to jump in deep?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you make it sound like a conscious choice. But when I was a kid, we had computers before most people had them, because my father was an econometrician and used computers to create econometric models, and so I just learned to program at an early age. And in third grade, I read Arthur C. Clarke's book 2001: A Space Odyssey, about the computer that goes haywire, and was just fascinated with this idea that you could make a computer intelligent and make it talk to you. And so I spent a lot of time as a kid kind of programming what might now be called chatbots and that sort of thing, trying to get a machine to talk to you. So it was always an interest of mine, but I went to college in 1987 and nothing was happening in AI at the time. I took like the one seminar you could take on it, but there weren't really any avenues, so I studied cognitive psychology instead. But around the time that I was sort of working on my dissertation and finishing up graduate school, some interesting things were starting to take off with speech recognition, natural language understanding, computational linguistics. And so I had the opportunity to go in that route, and then to get a postdoc at CSLI, which Alicia was talking about. Yeah, and it just sort of led to a life in AI.
So what? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. So what's your kind of current focus, and what's your company trying to achieve here?
Yeah, so our company, we lease to large organizations what we call a cognitive computing appliance, which is just a smart computer that has all of our algorithms on it, and companies can lease it and use it to analyze all their data. We call it human capacity cognitive computing, and I borrowed that term from Noam Chomsky, and actually a paper from Hauser, Chomsky, and Fitch in about 2005 or 6, where they pointed out that human language is distinguishable from the communication modes of other species by 3 particular things. One of them is that humans have this capacity for recursion, so we can take ideas and embed them into other ideas and then take that package and embed it in something else. And this gives us this rich sort of syntactic and semantic capacity that, I mean, we don't know what's in bird songs, but it doesn't seem like other creatures have that same recursive capacity that humans have. And the second one is what we call multimodality, and that's just that humans, we have a auditory symbol system that we use to communicate, but we can easily substitute other types of symbol systems. So I can say, hand me the glass, or I could say, could you hand me that, and point to it, and your brain is able to fuse one modality with another modality, put them together. And we're so good at doing this that even people who have completely lost their ability to communicate in the auditory channel can use a separate symbol system and have a language that's just as rich as what we consider to be the primary communication. So, and then the third capacity is sort of stems from the recursion, and that's this idea of sort of the infinite use of finite means, because we're able to do these recursive sort of embeddings with language and with communication symbols. We can create an infinite number of messages with just the finite number of letters and words that we have at our disposal. So as I say, that wasn't me, it was Noam Chomsky, so if it's wrong, you can take it up with him. But I think it's a very compelling message about the kinds of things we should be paying attention to when we're trying to develop a communication system that that humans will respond to and that will respond to us in a very human way. We can focus on the things that all animals can do, communicating in sort of simple messages and stuff. But if we really want something that's going to work well with humans, it clearly needs to have these sort of capacities. So that theory sort of drove the research that went into designing the architecture of our AI system.
So being kind of a deep AI insider, but you're relatively new to the world of immersive technology, what has it been that you've been walking around at the event so far and seeing and having kind of sparks of ideas about where there could be interesting overlaps between these two families of technologies?
Yeah. All kinds of really cool stuff. I mean, the more every new thing I try, I think about ways that you could work AI into whatever sort of demo or thing that we're looking at. Particularly the one at InnoActive, I thought just this idea of being able to sort of create a room that you can collaborate in and just sort of draw things in the air and bring in objects, make them disappear, teleport to wherever you want to go. I can just imagine that being immensely useful in all kinds of different areas. And then, also things like having an augmented reality is clearly a place where AI is going to play a huge role. I think of AI as being an expansion of sort of human consciousness, and we can talk more about that, but I also see virtual reality as sort of a sensory flip side of that expansion of consciousness where we're able to vastly increase the number of sort of sensory signals that we're taking in and have AI maybe help us process those.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, what would that mean to the average user if you were developing something that would dive into that particular kind of use case?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't know. I mean, I come at this problem thinking like, what is the brain for? Why do we have a brain? Anybody want to take a guess? You're like, that's a stupid question. I have a brain so when I wake up in the morning, I know where the coffee machine is, and I can get rolling, and I know how to talk to people at work and all that stuff. But really, like, why do we have a brain? Why is it there? What do we need it for? So I have what I think is something of a radical idea that the real purpose of the brain is to act as a compression device. Okay, we have lots of information coming in. We talk about the fact that we have 5 senses. Really, we have more like 11 senses because your sensations of touch, you've got sensory nerves for hot and cold and pain and different types of things. But there are billions of nerves coming into your brain, and your brain is dealing with these nerves firing every 10 to 40 milliseconds. So there's just an incredible amount of information that your brain has to deal with. So does it take all of this information and sort of analyze it in its raw form? No, there's no way it can do that. So what it does instead is it acts as a compression device, taking information from in different formats. You have sound, you have vision, you have touch, and it tries to fuse these things into meaningful chunks. And it does this by compressing information, and by compressing, you also discover structure. I've forgotten why I was talking about that. What was the question?
Yeah. So we're asking about that. You're taking this dive into. You said what you think the purpose of the brain is.
Right.
And I was just going to jump on that question because you talked about the brain is actually. You say you make this argument the brain is acting essentially as a compression device.
Right.
And I think you were just about to jump into. Well, what's the purpose of all that compression? What's the purpose of doing all of that work?
Right. So, there is a lot of information in the world, and to kind of understand, why would the brain need to compress information, or how does that lead to the brain doing the things that it does, there's this kind of, hand-in-hand interplay that goes between compression and discovering structure. In fact, you might argue that they're two sides of the same coin. So that when you're taking in events that are happening in your world and they're happening auditorily and visually, these events over time and in space in these 4 different dimensions, as they get compressed together, if they're compressed together in an optimized way, they'll be compressed in such a way that you discover structure both in space and in time. And so that's the kind of thing that, when I talk about sort of VR as being an expansion of consciousness like AI, with VR we now have the ability to add even more sensors to, the 11 sensory nerve capacities that we already have. So, you can, in a VR device, put all kinds of signals in there, stuff about business intelligence or, things about the status of your home and your family and stuff like that. Everyone knows when you're a parent, you kind of develop this other sense where there's the children are always in the back of your mind. You kind of know where they are, who's going to take care of them next, that kind of thing. It becomes this other sense. I used to live in New York City, and I would joke that having a car in New York City was a lot like having a child because you had to constantly be aware where it was parked, when the parking was going to expire, how you're going to have to arrange your life to go get the car. So there's this thing that, you develop this sense of where's my child or where's my car. With VR, you can kind of offload all of that, create sort of an AI, expanded sensory store, and, have VR kind of represent these things externally in some way.
So we talked a little bit about, before, we've talked about, how virtual and augmented reality can somehow, when we bring it together with AI, be acting as this type of very intelligent assistant,
Right.
So we don't have to be using some of our cognitive load to be keeping track of things and things that, we had this conversation, I think, on the train, things that if you were very, very wealthy, you would not be doing a lot of tasks that we might normally be doing now.
Yeah.
You would have kind of a network of experts who are doing a lot of the feeding of information to you, and sort of priming you to act in a higher capacity.
Right.
So when you think of AI and AR in that way, what's really required to bring those two worlds together? What's really required from the AI side to make that happen?
Yeah. So just in terms of platform, I mean, I see, VR as something, or AR, where, we can take all these different sensors. You would need some kind of platform where the sensors can be input into the AI, into what I call a common representational space. And that just means that, in the same way that our brain takes sight and hearing and sort of fuses them together in one part of the brain, the frontal lobe, we could also have an AI that takes all these various, inputs from things, puts them into a common representational space, and can serve as, an expanded memory for you, an expanded sort of pattern recognizer. Our brains are pretty good, but we have limited capacity, and we forget about things all the time, which is why it's great to have phones and the AI that's in Siri and stuff to sort of remind you about things. But when it comes to just sort of the bringing all those things together in a way that you could create a very compelling virtual reality world that really helps you feel like you have an expanded awareness. That, I think, is where the major sort of benefits are going to be.
Because we talked a little bit about this idea of the inputs being one thing that's going to make the combination of AI and VR and AR together really interesting, and that we're going to gain lots of new insights potentially from the new data that these types of systems can capture.
Yep.
We also talked about outputs, what these things can give us in terms of new types of understanding, new types of representation. Maybe it'd be good to jump in on that input side. So when we think about virtual reality systems, either the head-mounted displays and all the information we're capturing, or the body capture that's happening to show a lot of the things that we were seeing yesterday, or with augmented reality with these cameras that are constantly scanning the environment, doing depth sensing. What are the things that you as an AI scientist see? Oh, if I had this data, we could do this type of learning.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really going to be sort of the killer app, if you will, of AI and virtual reality and augmented reality in the future is just what I call salience tracking. So we move about in the world and we pay attention to things that seem to be important. When we look at paintings, we mostly look at the faces. There are in AI algorithms right now called attention mechanisms, and an attention mechanism basically tells an AI algorithm, if you're looking at a photo, what should you be paying attention to? And it might highlight faces in a photo or types of food and stuff. As well, in a sentence, it might highlight the sort of the subject and the object, and it does this using neural networks in just a statistical way. But people, when they started introducing these attention mechanisms to machine learning, found that it greatly improved, the kind of results you were able to get. So we can expand that attention mechanism to just sort of events happening in everyday life, and say, what is it that's worth paying attention to? If I'm walking around with AR glasses on, I've only got sort of a limited range of view, whereas we could potentially put sensors all around your body or your car or whatever. And so those areas where you have blind spots, you can get information from them. But it's not enough just to get the information, because then your brain would just be overwhelmed with all this stuff. So you need something that knows, what is salient in the environment and what do you want to pay attention to. So that's an area that I think, would be, if it's like, there's a guy with a knife behind you, you better run, something like that. If we're able to work that into augmented reality, or maybe you're at a party or something and you're talking to someone and your AI is like, hey, this person is interested in you. I don't know if you noticed, because you're kind of just obsessed with talking about yourself right now. But that's something I could see as being a useful sort of salience tracking feature. So I think that's one area that's going to be really big.
Well, and that was something you'd mentioned earlier. There's this really exciting thing of we have this potential to capture all of this data that tells us all these interesting things that are salient to us, right? Mm-hmm. But then if you think of the artificial intelligence being part of a system, it's also all of the other sensors that are out there in the world learning from each other.
Right.
It's sort of the autonomous vehicle model that if one car gets in an accident or sees something new, all of the cars in the system learn from it.
You have the Borg, Star Trek Borg mechanism, yeah. And that will be true of machines, I think, like cars, and it will also be true of humans. We'll be able to, if you are able to implement this salience tracking, on a personal level, and then upload that to some kind of meta model of human experience that you could then download into everybody else's, say, augmented reality glasses, and people could then be walking around learning from the experience of others that, like, hey, when you see this happen and then this happens, like, most of the time in the world it means this. It means this is going to happen next. And so you get a little sort of indication of that. That indicates that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of this kind of meta level. We had a speaker last year, a cognitive science scientist who was here, and like you said, you were talking in the beginning, like the brain is a compression device, and it's there, trying to discover structure, discover patterns. He was arguing that the fundamental purpose of the brain is a prediction-making device. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I think of the prediction-making device of the brain being augmented now by this prediction-making device of all the other potential sensors that are out there gathering data, feeding into the system.
Exactly. I mean, your brain has evolved to deal with the limited number of senses and the limited sort of experience of time that worked for humans for millions of years. As I said earlier, I don't think it's wrong that it's a prediction device. I think it's just sort of, that's the flip side of it being a compression device. And because you are compressing sort of the meaning of events happening in time, that just automatically leads to prediction. So that the brain, the fact that it's a prediction is sort of epiphenomenal of the idea that we can take events in time and compress them into meaningful chunks. So yeah.
So when we had an interesting moment last night when we went over to the hackathon, and there's one group in the hackathon that has this interesting model of learning, and they want to collect data and be able to learn from it. And you were guiding some of the younger hackers about, well, how would they start to learn about AI? For the people who are here who are really interested in these two fields and want to find a way to combine them, what's your advice for getting started in really being able to learn about and apply AI?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't recommend going back to college in this day and age. You can easily get all the resources you need online. I signed up recently. David Silver had this, and Sebastian Thrun had this Udacity self-driving car course, and I signed up for that just to sort of find out what was going on in this self-driving car stuff, since I do deep learning and AI, but the car thing is not really my area, so I want to know more about it. But I was amazed at all these young people who are just so excited about this and could just jump right into working on real life problems. So AI is this area where there are all these resources online that you can really sink your teeth into just immediately, and start working your own approach to problems, like, can I create a deep neural network that's going to recognize cats the same way that Google did in 2013? And you can, and it's fantastic.
So if you were talking to a young person who was interested in AI, where do you think are the most kind of promising avenues of research for real impact in the future? If you look at AI as a field, where would you go if you were going to start again?
Yeah, so, obviously there's a lot of AI that focuses on sort of recognizing things in pictures and video and stuff like that. And if you're interested in that, that's definitely a great area to pursue. And I'm biased, but human language is really that uncracked nut, And I think we've made some splits in the shell, but it's something that is, as I was saying before in reference to Chomsky, it's something that is really unique to humans. We can't just sort of look out at the rest of nature and figure out how it works or why it works that way. So we don't have a lot of insight into, sort of the inner workings at the neural level of what is, actually happening in the brain. So the thing that everybody's doing now is just playing around with different neural network architectures and seeing how well they do at mimicking or getting close to what we see when we actually communicate with each other. And it's not an easy problem, and it's something that's going to be, I think, ongoing research for at least the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah, it seems like an exciting area too, because we were talking. I think we had a conversation with Dominic Escoffier of NVIDIA, and he was talking about one of his favorite VR cases right now is that Star Trek bridge crew, and using your voice to start to control things, and using your voice to send commands to someone who's responding to you in some way. Yeah, it seems like a really promising area for this technology to somehow be more useful, more interesting.
Absolutely, and these things like the other InnoActive demo where they had the thing that would take you through what's the name of the store? Media Mark, yeah. Uh-huh. And take you through the store and help you find a TV and stuff like that. Great to have a little guy who will do that for you. But if it was really intelligent, you could ask it all kinds of questions. It would be able to answer things like, does this have a phono input, and which the people at Best Buy can't answer. I found, but things like that, or you could sort of ask it I'd really like to see how this is going to look in my living room, and then have it tap in some key that brings in the virtual reality of your living room with the stereo in it, and you can check it out. And if you had sort of AI and virtual reality and augmented reality working hand in hand like that, I think it would be a powerful experience, and it's probably the experience of the not too distant future.
Yeah, this is one of the use cases I think we'd mentioned at some point. That was, you were talking about this ability to sort of track a room and learn from it, and it's an AI case that I'm both excited about and scared about. Once we start collecting all this data, we have conversations all the time at home where I'll make some claim that claim is said, no, you didn't ever say that, or you said something completely different. And personally, I think, I don't know if I would love or if I would hate the AI assistant who said, you did actually say that.
Right.
Here's what really happened.
Right, the accountability AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, that could be very useful in, just sort of the conflicts of the real world too, where, obviously we're all fighting about what the truth is these days and what do facts mean, how are we representing what's going on in the world, and not so much AI, but just sort of the expansion of human memory, just things like putting dash cams on dashboards to sort of have evidence of what happened in an accident, in my opinion, has improved humanity. I mean, not specifically the dash cams, but just sort of this expansion of technology and of our ability to get at what is the truth. And that's obviously happening in my country right now, where like people who grew up where you could just make up the truth continue to do that, and then the media is like, but wait a minute, we have evidence here of you saying the exact opposite thing, and we'll see whether that has any impact on results in the next election.
Yeah, when we hear Donald Trump saying the AI is fake news, then we know we're getting somewhere,
yes, right? Fake AI.
I wanted to kind of make this as a bridge to something that I know is a conversation I've had a lot in Germany, which is there anything in this field? Is there any avenues of research that scare you, that you're afraid of the future for AI or of AI?
Sure. I mean, obviously, there's all kinds of nefarious things that you can do when you have an autonomous AI that, you might... With most AI, you have to give it some kind of objective. And we were talking about this last night, and the example came up of, what if you told an AI, we want to figure out the best way to, reduce energy usage, and the AI then comes to the conclusion, just kill all the humans, and then they won't use any energy. So I guess that's something to worry about, but hopefully in that system where you ask it, to figure out the best thing, you would not also tell the AI, oh, we've got all these autonomous killer drones that, you could use if they're going to be useful in this regard. So really, it's I guess my point is there's going to be a nefarious person with nefarious intention behind any kind of nefarious AI, and that's the kind of thing that I think we do need to continue to discuss the ethics of AI. Discuss what are the guidelines. Are we going to try to implement a kind of Isaac Asimov rules for the robots type of thing? Or probably something much more extensive, which is already happening right now. So,
and that's the next point that I wanted to think about when we're talking about the power of AI. This discussion is always happening within the context of power in society, right? So having these more powerful systems, having these more powerful networks isn't totally neutral. In some way, it democratizes power and it also concentrates power.
Right.
And I think that's a question that's really salient in Germany is what happens when we have these systems that are able to see most of reality most of the time. How is that potentially going to be used against us? Is that going to free us, or is that going to put us in a prison?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm an optimistic pessimist or pessimistic optimist, one of those. But I do think that, overall, technology has improved our lives and gone more to the side of democratizing than the opposite. So knowledge is now available in a way that it was never available before, and countries that are totalitarian and are worried about that do everything they can to keep that access to knowledge out of the hands of people. But we all know that it's just a matter of time before their ability to do that collapses. And we're going to have a much better educated world population. So I think the same is true with AI, that it's going to bring everybody, capabilities that right now are concentrated in the hands of, only the rich people who can afford to have assistants around them, telling them things and helping them to do things. And if you can have your own, AI that tells you, hey, now's the time to buy XYZ stock, or maybe you should look into buying a new home right now. This gives you the advantage that previously only people within a limited sphere of knowledge would have had. And so I think it is going to move us towards a better society. At the same time, there's going to be a massive transition akin to what we saw at the turn of the 20th century when we migrated from a primarily agricultural economy to sort of the industrialized economy that we have now. It was just about 100 years ago that John Deere bought a diesel engine company, and started to create tractors that could just drive by themselves. Well, not drive by themselves, obviously, but you could have one person, mowing a field instead of 30 people, and lots of people were put out of work. And we saw there was a huge economic depression that happened in the 1930s. Largely, I would argue, because of failed government policies that didn't create a safety net for re-educating a population that was now in rapid and drastic transition. And Franklin Roosevelt in the U.S. came in and tried to implement those types of policies. So I do think the future of AI depends a lot on how humans get together and decide on the policies that we're going to implement to try to help people transition into this new world. But it will be difficult, as all these things are.
Maybe this will touch on your optimistic pessimism or your pessimistic optimism. Your daughter is 8?
Yep.
Do you think that she's going to have a more experience of freedom in her life or less than you have?
Well, I think she already has more freedom in many ways. She's certainly not as bored as I was as a kid.
Is that a good thing?
I don't know. I mean, boredom brings creativity, I guess, but also just providing people with rich educational environments. I think helps the developing brain, and we have sort of an understanding about education now that goes way back, way beyond what we were doing 30 years ago. 40 years ago. And so for children now, I mean, I think we don't really know what the future is going to be like. Even 10 years from now, is she actually going to need to go to a university or not? Maybe not. And I'll just try to be one of those parents who doesn't get stuck into, you have to do things this way because that's the way I did it, because I think it's going to be a very different world.
On that kind of note, and this is something I wanted to now open up. I mean, you and I both come from academic backgrounds. I think we have a lot of passion for interaction, for teaching. I definitely wanted to give some time to open this up to the audience, because I know there have to be people here who have a lot of ideas about AI or a lot of questions about them. So I'd like to open it up to some time for discussion or just time for questions. So. And I know most people are hesitant to start it off, so we will stand here quietly. Anyone have questions or thoughts about what you've heard or things you wish you had heard more about? And we have a microphone. We'll run a microphone around, but you can say your question and I'll repeat it.
Right. So for the rest of you, the question, if I have it right, is AI is going to create some kind of vast transition in the workforce, and so how is that going to change our professional lives? So my take on that is, there may be a rough transition period. And probably, if things are going in the way I see them going, the most difficult thing is that we're going to see a contraction of the economy in a way that we're just not used to at this point. We're used to seeing things growing, things get more expensive, we make more money, we try to do more. And with AI taking up a lot of the slack of things that we do, first of all, you're going to see the marginal cost of products go down. So, when you've got an AI that can make your food, do the farming, and that could actually build a house for you and that sort of thing, or you get in a car and it's just a computer that's driving you around, the amount of money you need to produce these products and therefore to consume them becomes much less. So while you might initially be nervous that oh gee, I don't have to work 5 days a week anymore to make the money that I need, at the same time, you may have less disposable income, but you won't need as much income because a lot of the slack is being taken up by machines. That said, you might then wonder, well, what am I going to do with all of that extra time? And what am I actually going to do for a job? I do think that AI has promise, but it's not going to replace all of what we consider to be the really meaningful human work. And so my hope is that AI can kind of offload most of what we think of as just the soul-sucking aspects of our daily lives and get a machine that doesn't have a soul to do that, so we can do the things that make us feel like our souls are being expanded, whether they are creative. Well, I think, even if you're doing something technical, the work that is not soul-sucking is usually creative in some way. And so I would hope that these things that we really value, that really make us human, become the things that we can value and focus on a lot more than what we do right now. Does that answer your question?
Kathleen.
Right. Yeah, so the question is, what do I think about androids? Do we need them? We have Siri and Alexa that are just little boxes, and we can talk to them just fine. Do we need things that actually walk around and try to act like humans? And then Kathleen brought up what's called the uncanny valley, which if you haven't heard of it, I'm sure most of you have, is just this weird place where you can make something look like, a cute robot cartoon thing, and people are fine with it. But when you try to make it look too much like a human, but it's not quite like a human, it really bothers us. And we used to have at AT&T, we were doing a project with this talking head that's lips would move with the speech synthesizer. And but when she stopped talking, she would just sort of stare at you like this, and you're like, cover up the screen. I don't like her staring at me like that. So that is the uncanny valley experience. I don't think we necessarily, I think it's very difficult, as you were sort of pointing out with the fingers and the feet thing just in avatars or in animations, it's very difficult to get it right with, not only, there's just sort of the visual aspects, but then there's just the subtleties of human interaction, and there are even, a good number of humans who can't get that quite right, and then you're talking to somebody, you're like, you're a little weird, I like you, but yeah, you do some weird things sometimes. And so, if it's something that even we can't really codify very well, we don't know how to operationalize it, I don't see how we're ever going to get machines to do it. You can argue, well, you're an AI guy, we'll just have AI learn it. But when humans spend 10, 20, 30, 40 years, like trying to learn these things, and we still have a difficult time with it. I'm skeptical that we would really get, an android to sort of behave the way that Commander Data behaves, even though he's a little weird. But yeah. Go ahead.
I think on that note, my only guilt about putting together a talk like this is knowing that we're only going to just barely scratch the surface on the million and one fascinating things that this topic brings up. We have a lunch break. I'm going to let everyone get to the lunch break, but I also want to invite anybody who'd like to continue the conversation with Patrick to join him on the side of the stage or join him for lunch. It's a wellspring of knowledge, and love to have him be able to share more with you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Don't be shy.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Good job.
Yeah, nice work. Thanks.